Have you ever just looked out at a landscape or maybe up at the night sky and felt this, this deep connection to something way bigger than yourself? Well, that exact search for meaning is what a 17th century Welsh poet named Henry Vaughan poured his entire life into. So let's dive into his world and see how he found the divine in the most ordinary things.
Right off the bat, this one line kind of sets the whole mood, doesn't it? It's just packed with this sense of longing, this deep thought about the afterlife, and this powerful idea of light as something divine. This is the heart of his poetry, really, the soul's journey, caught between our world and the eternal. So who exactly was this guy? Well, Henry Vaughan was born in Wales way back in 1621. He was actually a physician and a translator, but it's his poetry that really made his mark. He's part of a group we now call the Metaphysical poets. They were known for using their wit and some really complex ideas to tackle the biggest questions out there. Faith, existence, our place in the universe. And right in the middle of his life, he published his absolute masterpiece, Silex Scintillans.
And this really gets to the core of his work. See, he wasn't just writing poems for the sake of it. He was on a lifelong quest for the divine. For him, poetry was his way of meditating, his tool for trying to understand that connection between us and God. And he saw these little flickers of that divine light absolutely everywhere.
His masterwork, Silex Scintillans, literally translates to the sparkling flint. And what a perfect title, right? Think about it. It's this idea that a divine spark can be struck from something as hard, as ordinary as a piece of flint. The whole collection is about his personal struggle, trying to square his life here on Earth with these incredibly deep spiritual hopes.
So, what makes his poetry feel so different? It's this amazing recipe he puts together. He takes this deep, genuine love for nature and mixes it with an almost painful spiritual yearning. His poems aren't big, loud declarations. No, they're more like quiet, personal reflections, filled with these super vivid images, all wrestling with the biggest questions: eternity, redemption, and what it all means. All right, so this brings us to one of his biggest themes, what he saw as nature's divine footprint. For Vaughan, the path to God wasn't just through a church door. Nope, it was a trail that wound right through the Welsh countryside he called home. And this is the key takeaway. A beautiful landscape wasn't just nice to look at. For him, it was a conduit, a direct line to spiritual truth. He really believed that if you just looked closely enough at God's creation, you could start to understand the Creator himself. And you can see this love for his homeland just everywhere in his writing. His collection, Alor Eis Canis, which means the Swan of the Wye, is pretty much a love letter to Wales. And then in poems like The Grass, he zooms all the way in, holding up a single blade of grass as this perfect, humble symbol of God's handiwork. Now, building on that connection to all things pure and simple, we hit Vaughan's second great theme, this powerful feeling of nostalgia, a real longing for the spiritual clarity that he was convinced we all have as children. His most famous poem on this is called The Retreat, and it taps into a feeling that I think a lot of us can relate to. That urge to just escape all the noise and complexity of adult life and get back to something more basic, more real. For Vaughan, that simpler time was also a deeply spiritual time.
And this contrast is everything to him. On one side, you've got childhood, a time of purity, simplicity, a time when you're naturally closer to the divine. But on the other side, adult life. He saw it as this maze of complexity and distractions, always pulling us away from that spiritual center. His poetry is kind of a lifelong attempt to find his way back.
This leads us right into his third major idea. If nature and childhood are pure, then what's the opposite? Well, for Vaughan, it was the world of adult ambition, the constant chase for wealth, status, and power. To him, it was all just a massive distraction.
This thought right here is basically the core message of his poem, The World, and it's such a powerful critique of materialism. Vaughan is saying that all the things we're told to chase, possessions, promotions, praise, they're ultimately empty. True, lasting fulfillment, he says, can only come from your spiritual life. And he's so consistent about this. In The World, he slams the pointlessness of all these earthly goals. And in They Are All Gone into the World of Light, he looks past this life completely, picturing the afterlife not as some scary end, but as a beautiful transition into a purely spiritual existence. Okay, so a deeply spiritual guy from the 1600s who loved nature and wasn't a fan of materialism, I get it. But really, why are we still talking about him 4 centuries later? What makes his voice stick around? Well, here's the wild thing about Vaughan's legacy.
It almost didn't happen at all. For a very, very long time after he died, his work was basically forgotten. He just vanished into obscurity.
It's kind of crazy when you look at it. For nearly 200 years, he was a nobody, almost completely lost to history. But then, in the 19th century, something started to shift. A new generation of poets and readers found his work and were just blown away by its depth and beauty. His reputation began to climb, and he eventually landed his spot as a key figure in English poetry.
So why does he still connect with us? Well, for one, he was way ahead of his time. He was talking about nature as a spiritual force long before the Romantic poets made it famous. But even bigger than that, his work just gets at something universal, right? The search for faith, the struggle to find meaning, that desire to connect with something more. These are timeless human questions, and Vaughan just offers such a profound and beautiful way of looking at them.
In the end, Henry Vaughan's work is this powerful reminder to look for the profound and the simple. He challenged everyone to see the divine not just in some grand cathedral, but in the quiet beauty of the world right outside their door. So that leaves us with one last thing to think about. He found the eternal in a blade of grass. Where do you see it?